Hello. I don't have,
Hello.
I am so sorry. Everything just stopped working, stopped moving, all kinds of stuff. So I don't know what just happened. Hey, family.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy, and you just heard from Donnie Williams.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
We apologize for those technical difficulties. We have a really interesting topic today, so we're just going to get straight in. I have such pleasure in introducing everyone to Jennifer Randall. She is a new hire in my department at the International African American Museum Center for Family History. She is our new program manager slash lead archivist. Truly invaluable addition to the team. And one of the reasons why I'm really so excited. So, welcome to the show, Jennifer. Sorry, I was getting ready to. I'm so excited. I was getting ready to carry on. So, welcome to the show.
That's okay. Thank you so much for having me again.
And one of the reasons why I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have is I have spent such a long time Googling to see if any genealogy related show or American history show has ever talked about researching triracial ancestry. And specifically, when I mean triracial, is going back to the early period of British colonial America, the intersection between European, indigenous, Native American, and African. And actually, you were looking at three people on the screen who have triracial ancestry. Um, I think that's really cool. And one of the other reasons why I hope that this is going to be an illuminating conversation is some of the science I've actually seen that's taken a look at triracial DNA in the context that we're discussing it. Was an old article by Science Magazine. It's about 8 years old. They could probably do with updating it. But it said that the average African American, apart from the African, obviously, carries something in the region of about 24 to 25% European DNA and anything between 0.5% and 3% Native American DNA. So that can explain why you have three people who look very different, sharing that kind of genetic mix. And we have a whole show premised on the difficulties and challenges of doing African American ancestral research, which has come on in leaps and bounds over the decades as real kind of luminaries have shared their best practice. European research is kind of standardized. There's whole certificate programs on it. It's codified. It's a thing. But when it comes to researching indigenous tribes, that's where things get kind of tricky, especially when you follow the paper trail back and you get into the 1700s. That's great. But when you have an indigenous ancestor who was alive in the 1600s, that can get a little bit tricky. So, Jennifer, I was going to ask you to talk a bit about kind of your mix and kind of what drew you into researching your family history.
Sure. Thank you. So essentially with me, it started with my family's history, as with everybody else's. I grew up in a very small rural area of South Carolina. The actual place is called Dog Bluff, South Carolina. Before that, it was called Dog Bluff Township or the Demery Settlement. And it is near, I would say, in between Conway and Aner, South Carolina, which are also small towns. So middle of nowhere near Myrtle Beach. But basically, there's not a lot of the settlement left other than a cemetery, and there are some ruins of older homes and things throughout the forest. And the area is being developed now. I think it's being turned into a lot of suburbs. However, the settlement, when it was originated, I believe 1813, I may be wrong on that date. It was actually a plot of land purchased by John Demery, who was a mixed race individual from North Carolina. And that's pretty much, I had heard that a little bit as a child. There was a big article that was published in the early 1990s about the settlement, but I didn't know anything growing up. And other than basically like being in that area and seeing the way that my family and my extended family treated the land and acted, and it was a little bit different than my white counterparts when I went to school. But like I said, there was nothing really to research other than, asking family stories. So basically, eventually I went and got a history degree, and I was able to gain institutional access. And doing that made me able to learn more and more and more, because I grew up thinking like I knew that I had Black ancestors. I knew that I had indigenous ancestors, but I guess I thought everybody did. But it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I started to do more research. And I wanted to just know as much as possible. I wanted to know more about this settlement. And then I went to library school, got into archiving, worked at a traditionally Native institution. And from there, I was able just to learn more and more and more about the Demarys in the settlement. It was a triracial isolate in the middle of nowhere in South Carolina, and there's little to no research on them. And they did a lot. I mean, they had huge tracts of land, thousands and thousands of dollars for free people of color in the early 1800s. That's huge. It's significant. There needs to be more research on it. And unfortunately, there's not. And the only way I can access anything is through institutional access.
I have a question for you. Actually, it's a question stemming from a comment that one of our viewers made at the top of the show. So he basically said, "Oh, you're going to be talking about Melungeons," and I think this is a great opportunity to distinguish between Melungeon, triracial, and free people of color, because those are three terms that I see Americans using interchangeably. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, they represent three distinctly different groups of people. Am I wrong on that?
I don't think so. So it's my understanding that Melungeons are a specific triracial isolate from Appalachia, but a specific part of Appalachia in northern Georgia, Tennessee, and western North Carolina. And they're just it's just another name for any triracial group. There's also others that are often used as slurs. Brass ankles was a big one in South Carolina, especially in the Low Country. And Croatan is a big one too, and that is what a lot of people in my family were called. And the people now known as the Lumbee in North Carolina were called Croatan. Initially, it was thought that it was because they were somehow involved with the lost colony theory and Croatan, but eventually it became a slur. The word Crow became used as a slur to describe our ancestors, and it got sort of changed later on. And it's just another one of those names. I'm sure there are a lot more that I'm not naming. Those are just the ones I'm most familiar with.
Before you say anything, Brian, let me clear some stuff up. Y'all see where I'm going? My whole attitude has changed a little bit. We will not have any derogatory or negative things being said to our guests. She is here as an expert on what it is that she knows how to do. We ask that you definitely respect what it is that she has to say and take this opportunity to learn something new. That's all I got to say. Okay, go ahead.
Good. Whereas, as I opened up the show with triracial, it's just having that mixture. Again, within the context of what I'm talking to, Ancestry, that's kind of pointing to that really early colonial period, the intersection between African, European, and Native. So that could include people who were enslaved, as well as people who were free people of color. And I guess that's how I think about it in my head, making a distinction between those three different groups. And thank you for talking about the Melungeons, because again, that pertains to a group of people within a very specific geographical location.
Yeah, I see a comment about the Goans, and I'm really glad you brought that up. The Goans are really interesting to me. They are something that one of my former research students and I have been sort of kind of researching for the last couple months here and there. The Goins family, originating from South Carolina, actually moved from South Carolina to North Carolina and into Virginia eventually. And I think Brian and I may have discussed them in passing previously. But an interesting thing about them is in North Carolina, during the 1800s, there were multiple school districts because of segregation, and they had native schools and they had white schools and they had black schools. They would not let the Goins go to any of those schools because they didn't know what they were. And it was just really interesting to me. And there's not a lot of history about them as far as I know, unless Mr. Goins has more. Please message me later. I would love to talk to you about it.
You know,
But
Brian and I are both Goins.
really,
Mm-hmm.
there's more information. There's so many Goins, and it's just fascinating to me. I mean, they created their own school, the Goin School, just because they were like, we don't know what you are. We're going to put you in this fourth category. And it just really speaks to, I mean, North Carolina had, 3 different types of schools, but typically it's a racial binary, and they're on the periphery of that. But so many of us are on the periphery of the biracial gaze in this country. It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
The knots this country has twisted itself into just because of this blood quantum thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're still kind of dealing with it. It's just a sad part of our history. Sorry, apparently there's a huge fire.
Oh gosh.
So I wanted to I wanted to know more about your overall research. Can we kind of, I guess that's a good place to start, is to just start on your research as a whole. Like what happened that made you figure out you were this, and you were this. And then tell us what all 3 things you are.
Sure. So when I first got interested in all of this, I, like millions of Americans, did my Ancestry DNA. Boy, was I confused. Because, and to this day, my Ancestry DNA, I don't know about other people's, changes constantly. I had a pretty significant amount of African DNA when I first took the test. And I guess significant, I don't know if that's the right word. It was about 17%. And for someone who looks like me, 17% does seem pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it over time, I also had a lot of trace ancestry that was unassigned, about 5%. And those percentages both changed on me regularly. I think my current African percentage is about 8 or 9%. And then the trace ancestry is about 3 to 4% the last time that I checked. But I have no indigenous, American indigenous or North American indigenous DNA. And I wanted to say that because I wanted to reiterate something that we had discussed in passing. There is no DNA test anywhere that can tell you if you are a Native American. There is not enough Native DNA for these testing companies to check against. And even if there was, most of the DNA that they have reflects that of those who were initially called the five civilized tribes, and it's not even 100% accurate with those. But those are, what is that? The Seminole, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, I can't remember the rest off the top of my head. I apologize, everybody. But the 5 tribes. But I don't know any Native person who has taken an Ancestry DNA test or any other DNA test that has more than 1%. People I know who live in Native communities have lived in Native communities for their entire life. I know a lot of people who live in closer to Mexico, and they have a lot more indigenous DNA than that, though. But most of my close friends do not. And it's just an uphill battle. And I also want to mention that because most tribal communities do not recognize Ancestry DNA or anything else as a form of gaining tribal recognition. The only time I've ever heard of tribes using DNA tests is to prove if someone is who they say they are, they are actually their father's child or something. they do not rely on any sort of DNA test as far as looking at regions where you may or may not be from.
And I can empathize with them on that, because it's one thing to want to be fed, to be recognized by a tribe, but if you don't know the culture, if you don't know the language, if you don't know the spiritual beliefs, if you don't even know how to cook, I don't know, the food from that specific culture, just those little things that make a people and give a people a distinct identity. Because obviously Cherokee must be different than Creek or Shawnee,
Mhm.
because they have different tribal names. They can be related to each other. They can even be part of the same federation, but even they saw differences amongst themselves. Um, why would anyone want to get recognized by a tribe when they don't have that knowledge? So that's just my opinion, that I wanted
Yeah,
to
and
express.
there are a lot of nefarious reasons, as we've spoken of, that people want to do that. They think they're, oh, I'm 0.1%. I'm going to go join this tribe because scholarships. They think they might get casino money. Not every tribe has a casino, sorry. Um, but it doesn't work that way. There's a lot more to it. Being native and being indigenous is a lot more about growing up in your culture, being recognized in your culture and in your tribal community. There's so many cases, even historically, of you married someone who's white and they become part of the tribe. That person is now part of my tribe because I married them. All of our children are members of this tribe. And that's another way. Like, they're not going to have a specific amount of DNA because they're not of that group. They married into it. And so that's something important too. So someone might say oh, he was 100% native or whatever, however you might say it. He was, because he was celebrated in his community, um, recognized by his community as somebody, as part of the community, and was active in the community. He's 100% native. Blood quantum is
You
not.
just made my mom feel absolutely wonderful, because you and I, we had that conversation, and
Mm.
now it makes sense.
Yeah,
So
blood
yeah.
quantum it's a settler concept, and it was actually really created to say who is and who isn't native during and around the removal period. So, um, sorry, it's not real. it's it's completely different than looking at which European country you're a descendant of. It's completely different. There's more culture, more of a cultural impact, and there's cultural sovereignty. I can't speak on any other tribe other than my own, and they might have different viewpoints and things, but there's a lot going on there besides percentages.
So one question that I have is, and this is hopefully going to prep a conversation where people can start thinking about where they need to look for information if they suspect that they have Native ancestry, as well as the other two. So in terms, and again, the ball starts rolling at 1619. That's when the first Africans were here in and amongst, in and around Jamestown, all along the James River. So there's nothing documented to show that they had intermixing with the native tribe at that period, but their descendants certainly did. Um, did biracial and triracial people kind of live independent lives, or did they start to form communities? And what did those early communities look like?
So there are a lot. There are a lot of maroon communities. The most famous being the Great Dismal Swamp. Um, I would love more information from them. I've been trying to reach out recently. I'm not working on any specific thing. I'm just a nosy person. I'm just very curious. But the community in which that my ancestors came from, most of the indigenous people, like my direct ancestors, were descendants of the Chirral tribe, which is historically a tribe from Virginia that migrated down through North Carolina and eventually into South Carolina into 1730s, I believe. Um, and they intermarried with people near the Dog Bluff Plantation, which was, I believe, owned by Anthony Sweet at that point. And they all intermarried. A lot of other Native people came from different areas around South Carolina. I believe I found one Cherokee ancestor who came from Western North Carolina prior to the removal, who married into that tribe as well. But basically, they're a conglomeration. And they're just representative. And the African Americans who were in there were free people of color. I have no idea how they got their money, and it's amazing to me that they had so much of it. They bought large tracts of land in this very rural area, and they built 2 schools, churches, the cemetery where my family still uses. There's stores. The outskirts, there were mills. They were all very active in the turpentine business. They were all farmers, especially tobacco farmers. Tobacco farming has been a long road for my family. I grew up on the tobacco farm. I grew up in those fields. It was terrible. That's why I went to college. But it's always been the backbone, I think, of a lot of the Southeast is these small mixed race communities who are the backbone of the economy for smaller areas. Horry County, South Carolina, does not have a huge history of plantations, and not in the way that the low country of South Carolina does, at least. It was very rural. But a lot of people of color moved there and made a lot of money.
Good old industriousness. So again, thinking about those communities, and I'm thinking the roadblocks for most people are going to come before that 1790 census.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking most of these communities, or at least the ones that I'm familiar with in North Carolina, which is going more of it towards Northampton County, Halifax, Wake, that part of it, just over the Virginia border. They were really rural areas, and a lot of the farms were at a great distance from each other. There were no churches. There were no government buildings. There were no administrative buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real kind of lack of records, except for those people who were literate, who maybe have had a Bible and kind of made those notations about birth, marriages, and deaths. So that's one kind of basic challenge of trying to get documented research done. Are there any ways to kind of work around that?
So it's really hard. There's really no easy way to start. Most of what I've found is through archival research, and I mean deep dives. Basically, these communities especially, you're not really recognized until you are right in the white people's face. I don't really know how else to say that. That might not be right. But I have so many articles that I've clipped from historic newspapers from the mid 1800s of my ancestors doing something maybe illegal or interesting that white people thought was interesting, and they wrote an article about them. So I was able to find out, like, hey, this person from this tribe is my third great grandmother. Here's a really cool article about her. And then, of course, there's census records that are really inaccurate. And that makes it even harder. I don't think people really understand how complicated census records can be. And I'll share in just a second, or I think I sent you the photos if you want to share them while I'm talking. I don't know, whatever's easier.
Because researching a product line.
I'm sorry?
Where'd you send them?
I emailed them to you.
Oh, goodness. They didn't come through.
That's okay. I can pull them up while I'm talking. I can multitask.
Okay. Yeah, they didn't come through.
It's so true, because when I was doing research for a private client who was also triracial, it was this is between 1910 and the 1950 census. Mm-hmm. His family was recorded as white, mulatto, black, native, and in different documents. And they were even within the same kind of 5-year period. Their racial designation kept changing.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
I can put it up right now. It just popped up.
Yep.
Okay. So this is just an interesting trail of documents that are very confusing. So this is the birth certificate for, I guess she would be my second cousin once removed, Nettie Demery. And you can see that both parents were listed as Croatan, which is what the designation that I was talking about at the beginning. So they were both, all of them were native when they were born. So that leads me to the next record that has them on it when Nettie is 1 year and 3 months old. This is the census for 1930. This is the same people. They are now mulatto. And then much later, this is the death certificate of Desdie. Desdemona is a common family name in the Demarys, most of my family. And then Desdie or Dasdie is a common nickname for that. But this is Desdie's death certificate in 1969. So much, much later. You can see that she is now, where is it? She is now white. So she changed a lot. So I don't know who exactly is reporting the race on any of these. In 1969, I am imagining that Causey, her husband, was doing that. And this is a photo of Nettie. I just thought she was really pretty, and I found this the other day.
She is. I may have a partial answer for you, Jennifer, because my 3 times great grandfather in Edgefield, Oliver Harling, his death certificate is hilarious. Clearly, there was a doctor who knew him, and there was a doctor who didn't. And this goes to the viewer who said something about supplying race to census takers. So there was a doctor who knew him, and there was one who didn't. And the one who didn't know him was the one who put the first designation. He put white. That got crossed out mulatto. That got crossed out white. That got crossed out 3 times. Like the person tried to scrub it out and was mulatto.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this question then.
Let me just quickly go on to the census one. Always remember that when it came to the racial designation on census returns, enumerators were making assumptions. Trust me, Black people were not calling out their race when the census taker came around. Danya.
True. That is very true. So you just made a comment when you were showing your pictures, how it went from one thing to another thing to another thing. So that leads me to ask yet another question. And if this is too much, please by all means saying, well, I'm not really sure. I don't think I want to go into that. I have no problem with that. Do you think that Black people or people of color, however you want to put it, that those natives then, I'm trying to remember, and Brian, you might can help me with this, because I'm trying to remember what Chief Lozado said. He made a comment about everybody being labeled as Black first.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went and switched to mulatto.
Oh, that was the South Carolina thing. Remember, he said if you were in South Carolina, if you weren't white, you were Black. And that was it. They didn't.
So that's the question that I'm asking. Was that in other places as well? Because I know, especially with Edgefield, I don't know how much Edgefield research you've done, Jennifer, but it is a force. And
she's done it as much as she's heard me kind of moan about it.
Listen,
talk about
baby, stay away if you can. I don't recommend it. But yeah, so with that being said, is it like that in other places, or was it just that area that was really kind of saying if you weren't Black, you were white, or if you weren't white, you were Black?
I've seen it in a couple places, actually. When I worked in North Carolina at a traditionally Native school, and people would often try to get me to help them with genealogy, and I would see the same thing. North Carolina did have better records slightly. Some years they did let you put Croatan or Indian on your census record. Sometimes they didn't. I guess it just changed every 10 years. I don't know. I haven't seen many records personally from Virginia. That's not really been in my wheelhouse personally. I've also sort of been interested in how my family between 1940 and 1980 got whiter. Not literally, but on paper. I actually found some articles yesterday that around that same time period, starting in 1934 up until 1941, There were regularly articles in these newspapers about the police having to monitor the Demery settlement and the offshoot, which is called Jordanville, because there were just these truckloads of white people were just driving around with weapons and hurting people. And I don't want to assume, but it just sounds like eventually my family just had to pass for whatever they could. And then, and unfortunately, we did lose a lot of information because of that. A lot of my older relatives still don't talk because of things that have happened. I mean, the KKK was still relevant in South Carolina, in Conway, in Horry County. I actually just watched a documentary of a KKK march from like 1991 in Conway, South Carolina. So they didn't go far.
I went to school in the 90s in Jackson, Mississippi. They were still there. They were very prevalent. They were there and very prevalent.
And I'm not sure why the native school, the Demery school, got burned down. It got burned down in, I want to say the 40s or 50s. I have no idea why. I can only assume that's why. The church was also burned, but it was much, much later. So I don't know why. I don't personally have the answers. I'm sure someone does. But they were never rebuilt. And so that's kind of telling also. Like, now none of these kids can go to school because there's legally nowhere for them to go to school. But it just looked like over the years, through all of my research, I had another photo I can't find of my uncle. Well, it's a couple, my grandfather's brother. On his birth certificate, it says black. And then on simultaneous census records, he's mulatto. And then when he joined World War II, he is white but ruddy. And that's why I was telling Brian, like, what does ruddy mean? I've never heard that in my life described a person as ruddy. But he was just very red. So what have you.
Interesting. To the viewer who was mentioning about African Americans being the original indigenous people, I'm going to just say this. I've been saying it for 11 years. You can't say something like that without a link to an independently reviewed, verified source. Please, if you're going to post that on our channel, if you have an academic study, a scientific study, I don't want a YouTube video or someone's blog post. I want a scientific or academic link. You can post that for me. You will be the star viewer of the day.
So Brian messed around and found me and Jennifer. Okay, y'all. What I mean. So what I mean by that is she ready to take all of those questions on. So I starred them, Brian. That's why I didn't put them up.
I have so many questions. I
starred them because when I saw it, I don't know if y'all saw my face change a little bit. I saw that and I was like, okay, y'all gonna mess around. I'm gonna say mess around and find out she is me. Okay, she don't care. So I'm sorry, off the break. Hey, she's ready for those questions.
So how about we do this? I have one comment to make, and then let's roll into the questions because there are a lot.
Go ahead. That's what I was getting ready to ask you.
So there are some purportedly native lineage books that are out there. I'm going to start with the first one. You may have heard of a series of books. There's 10 or 11 of them called the Shawnee Heritage books. Predominantly the Shawnee, the Metis, and the tribes around that part of Virginia. It purports to go back to even the 1500s and the 1400s. None of those books have sources and citations. Some of the information in there about the late 1600s and the early 1700s, it's good information. My advice, do not copy that book and put it in your family tree. And if you've done that, delete every one of those lines. Trust me, the book's kind of partially fabricated, but there is some real stuff in there. What I would suggest is they're freely available online. I believe they're on Internet Archive. Treat them like an Ancestry shaky leaf hint. Could be true, could not be true. You're going to have to do your research. There are some wonderful local history books out there that do come with sources and citations for Virginia people and North Carolina local history. So, like I said, like anything else, you have to do your research. There's also, I believe it's a religion. They're called the Moravians, and they've done a wonderful series of books. And these are first-hand accounts. This is different. These are first-hand accounts from them. Think of them like the Quakers in terms of the record keeping these people did. The records they kept are phenomenal, and they go beyond names. They actually talk about communities and people, and kind of how and the different tribes and how life was lived. Jennifer, we spoke kind of quickly about this the other day. Was there anything else you wanted to add about the Moravians?
They're not. I've seen some of their records. I did have a classmate in library school who was the archivist for the Moravian Church in North Carolina. A lot of really good information. A lot of churches have so much information, and some of it's TMI. If you want to know everybody's business, I highly recommend reading some Baptist church records from the 1800s. But there's so much good information, and it's not a source I think people really think about a lot. But for Black history and Black genealogy and indigenous genealogy, the church is a really good place to start.
Excellent. Donnie, do you want to cue up the first question?
I sure can. They rolling in these comments. I'm so proud of you guys. Okay, so we're gonna start easy first. Sharon Clont said, "Is there a good list of triracial communities?"
I haven't found one yet. I would basically start looking where you live, if that's something you're interested, or where your ancestor lived. If you know specifically, you can even reach out to an academic librarian, a reference librarian. They might know a little bit more. Sometimes they randomly know some very niche researchers, and having worked in an academic library, I happen to know a lot of very niche researchers, and they are my go-tos. But definitely start local and ask around and see what you can find.
And I'm going to hop in really quick. Some resources you may want to use as well to look for old books. And again, looking for sources and citations. Old books that because a lot of these are in PDF format and you can download for free. There's Google Books. There's Hathy Trust, HATHITRUST. There is JSTOR, JSTOR. Some stuff you can get just on a Gmail account. Otherwise, you have to have an institutional account, like a university account or a high school library account, to be able to get their older, some of their reference materials and internet archives.
All right, so let's go to the next question. Sheila Bradshaw, she said, "Can you explain the Mowa natives in Alabama?"
I don't know anything about them. I apologize. I know that the traditional lands, some of the traditional tribes who were run out of Alabama were the Muskogee Creek, and maybe the Chickasaw or Choctaw had land there, and they were moved to Indian Country, Oklahoma. But I don't know much about specific tribes in Alabama. I would reach out directly to someone in that community.
Okay, and then Yolanda Schubert, which is our cousin, she said, "My question is about the indigenous. My question is about the indigenous Mexico people who were here before the Europeans, and how you would trace them, because she pulls that in her DNA."
That's a really great question. I don't have a specific answer for that. I would recommend reaching out to researchers closer to that area. If you know Spanish, I mean, maybe you could contact someone in Mexico or the traditional language of whatever tribal community it would be. There's a really great institution. The Arizona State University has the Labriola Library, which is an indigenous library. And they have all indigenous and Chicano librarians, and they would be a great place to start. I don't know if they would know, but they could point you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's probably a good idea to say that it would be fair to say that Jennifer, you're very knowledgeable about the native tribes in specific parts of North Carolina and South Carolina and Virginia, because it's just worth mentioning there were numerous Native communities, just numerous ones. I think it would be incredible for any one person to be knowledgeable.
Yeah. I wish.
Sharon asked, have you seen any surname patterns for triracial groups?
Yes, actually, in a lot of areas. Oxendine, Jacobs are big ones in North Carolina. Goins, Lowry's a huge one. Demery, which is my family, but Demery can be spelled multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen 4 in the last 2 days, so it could be anything, but Demery is a big one. Turner and Hatcher were big in South Carolina and North Carolina as well. And Hatcher can actually also be Hatchel, is what I've just learned.
And I'm going to throw another one in for Virginia and North Carolina, and that's the Bird family with a Y and an I.
That makes sense. I know a lot of birds from North Carolina.
We've done the indigenous question, or who was the original one.
And it disappeared. I think because I started, and then now it's gone. Because that's the question that I want, and so now I'm like in the scroll trying to find it and cannot find it. Don't be scared.
That's okay. I was a bit of a black dad at that moment, so. Yeah.
I mean, it's.
But in all fairness, it's not the first time we've seen it. It's not the first time someone's commented on that on this show. And I always say the same thing. I am always open to learning. I'm open to learning new things. I've learned so much in this short time that we've had with Jennifer. I'm not afraid when it comes, I'd rather know the truth than not know the truth. But if you're going to say something like that, that's really controversial, you have to be able to back it up.
I mean, you really do, and that's probably one of my biggest issues when people make those types of comments. I mean, we have family members that believe in those types of things, and I've tried my best to have, open and good conversations with them. But when you start to not make sense in what it is that you're saying, as Terry Burke says, my face then starts to show everything. So I get to the point where I'm just not going to talk to you no more. I'm over it, because at this point you don't want to learn. You just want to repeat stuff and not have any proof behind it. That is the comments and thought processes of Donya Williams. Do not hold this on Brian, Genealogy Adventures, or Jennifer. That is me. That is how I feel. Once you get to that point where I feel like you just don't want to learn, you don't want to hear it.
Because again, I'm not going to dwell on it because we're here to discuss something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
If someone were to basically say that Africans and Europeans, natives will always be the indigenous people, the two oldest non-indigenous cultures and peoples, yes, then you could say it was European and African. Because as far as I understand, in Jamestown and the James River area, there were only 3 ethnicities: African, English. It wasn't even fully British. I don't even think there was a single Scottish person in that group in 1607. And listen, African, English, Native. That was it.
There's a really good book. I don't know if you guys have read it. It came out a couple years ago. It's Afro-Indigenous Persons History of the United States by Kyle Mays, who's a professor somewhere in California. I've totally forgotten. Sorry. But it's a really, really amazing book, and it explores his Afro-Indigenous history and also explores the history of Indigenous Africans and how that plays into his identity as Afro-Indigenous. But it was really fascinating. I highly recommend it if anybody's interested.
And again, one of the things I would love to learn is actually, when did that mixing start?
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's what I would like to know. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well, that's one thing I'd love to know. The other thing that I would love to know is when Jamestown was attacked in 1621 by the Pamunkey and hundreds of European English colonists lay dead, that none of those Angolans, none of those nearly 50 people, not one of them was touched. And I've asked the Pamunkey about that. Why didn't you kill them? You knew where they were. They couldn't hide. Why didn't you kill them? No one seems to know why they were spared. And when it comes to the foundation of this country in British America, that's a mystery. I don't know if we're ever going to get the answer to that one.
That's really interesting.
To answer Angie Wilson's question, I will get the list from both Brian and Jennifer of different sites that you guys mentioned, like the book sites and things of that nature, Brian.
Honestly, it's a quick Google. It's Google Books, Happy Trust, JSTOR, Internet Archive. We're a show of researchers.
Yeah, we can put them. We can put the list on those things will go into the comments. So yeah, I want y'all to know that. I really wanted you to answer his question. Like it's the way this just made me so angry. Like don't. Oh.
It was a statement.
Yeah, but he had a question at the end of it.
What was the question?
I don't know, and I want to. I just want to.
I think we were
really wanted you to. That's why no comments are popping up. I don't want y'all to think I'm not paying y'all any attention. It's just that the comment. I want her to answer this, and because I love it when we ain't scared, when we not scared. Like I love it.
Any other starred comments or questions?
Well, here's one from Henry. Getting it Afro-Indigenous people's history. Did he? Who? Oh, okay. Who are we talking about? Did he attend San Francisco State University?
I'm not sure. Kyle T. Mays is, I think, originally from Michigan. His grandmother actually started the Standing Bear Medicine School, which was an Afro-Indigenous primary school for urban Indians in Detroit. So I think that he originated there. So I don't know if he went to San Francisco. I'm not sure. Sorry.
And then another question was asked, even though it was for Mississippi and that you may not know anything about, but one of the things that I want to know, because of what you and I talked about with my grandfather and everything, or my great grandfather, what are best ways to, like research Native tribes? She's asking about Mississippi, but just in general, what is the best way? Because I can honestly say to you that once I got to the point when I was trying to find out more about my grandfather, I didn't have the best response from them either, like what you were talking about earlier. And it was actually kind of rude and mean with the response, because they literally sent me into a circle, like a catch-22. Prove this first, then you come to us. Yeah. But if I need to talk to you about it, I can't talk to you. You have to do. So it's like a consistent circle. So what is the best way to go about doing it?
So unfortunately, that does happen. I'm sorry that happened to you. I always say go directly to the tribe first. Most, if not all, tribes have an archival department, an archival committee, a history committee, a cultural preservation officer, or something of that stature that you could try to reach out to first. If you don't get the type of response that you would be helpful for you, you might want to start looking at your local public library, and then if there's any local university or library or anything like that, and just sort of get the ball rolling that way. It is really hard. I can see it from both sides. Reaching out as an outsider, or what they perceive as an outsider, is really hard. And there's so many people, as I said before, that are reaching out for nefarious reasons. Not that you were, obviously, but there's so many people who have negative reasons, or want some sort of capitalistic gain from their research, that's how they have to respond to people now. But going directly to the source, the Native community, the tribe, whatever it is, they're the best source. And then outward from there, your public library and your academic libraries. Libraries are your best friends. Also, historic newspaper archives I love historic newspapers. I could look at them forever, probably more than I should, but there's so much information in there. And if you're not, AI doesn't pick up everything. With a lot of these websites, it's up there and you type in your search term and AI tries to pick it out for you. Read beyond that because AI misses a lot of stuff. But start doing the research on that community and see where you fit into the community and go from there.
And can I just interject, because I've just seen a comment, and you probably saw my face change as I was reading the comment. When it comes to reading books, always, and especially when those books are talking about a critical or really important subject, always make sure that anything that may seem controversial or problematic or just needs proving is sourced and cited, where that person got that information from. And the reason why I got prompted on that one, someone in the audience was mentioning a book that was saying that Scottish people who were captured in Culloden and transported to the colonies as prisoners on ships were Black. They were not. But it's a book that doesn't have a single citation in it. And it is really covering controversial subject matters because it's trying to say that Scottish people were Black when they weren't.
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay, so with that being said, guys, we really got to wrap the show up.
So I just want to say always, always check sources and citations for books.
100.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many books have excerpts about my tribe and my family. And I'm like, you have no sources. Why are you talking about my family? And they're like literally like family business that nobody needs to be reading about. How did that get there? And I need to know. So check your sources.
Well, I want to thank, and we got to wrap it up, Brian. We got to wrap it up. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Definitely chiming in. You guys did your thing. Like you guys did your thing. And Jennifer, you are awesome. And we must have you back on the show. I don't care if we make it up. We just want to have you on the show, just to have you on the show. I love it. Thank you so much for being here with us. Next week, we're doing one show next week. And then, guys, we will not be back until January 26th to get ready for Black History Month. So, with that being said, I'm Danya.
I'm Brian. We will see you next week in all the usual places, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.